There is a silence that follows loss. It is not the silence of peace, nor the quiet of sleep. It is the kind of silence that hums in your bones, the kind that wraps around you like fog, dense, shapeless, familiar. You walk through it, and everything feels slightly muted, as if the world has dimmed its volume out of respect. Grief lives in that silence. We often imagine grief as an intruder, something that bursts into our lives uninvited and overstays its welcome. But grief is not a stranger. It is a part of love. It is the shadow that love casts. It arrives when the person, the dream, the future we loved is no longer there to receive what our heart still longs to give. You see, love is movement. It flows, it seeks connection, it wants to reach. And when the beloved is gone, through death, through separation, through the slow erosion of what once was, the energy of love doesn't simply disappear. It has nowhere to land. It turns inward. It lingers in the corners of our memory. It spills into tears. It hardens in the throat. It echoes in the empty chair at the table. Grief is love, displaced. I often think of grief as a form of devotion. It is our ongoing conversation with what we have lost. Even when we no longer have the other person, we continue the dialogue within ourselves. We imagine what they would say. We hold their absence as though it were still a presence. Have you ever caught yourself reaching for the phone to share something with someone who is no longer here? Or turning to speak to them in your thoughts, only to realize they will not answer? That impulse, that reflex, is love. It is still alive, even when the relationship has transformed into memory. So, grief is not the opposite of love. It is its persistence. When we grieve, we are saying, "You mattered. You shaped me. You left traces in the architecture of my being." But in our culture, we often treat grief as something to get over, as if it were a disease we must recover from, as if time were a cure, and the absence of tears a sign of healing. Yet, grief is not an illness. It is a response, a natural, intelligent response of the heart to the rupture of love. We cannot schedule it. We cannot measure it in months or milestones. It is not linear. One day you feel composed, functional, even hopeful. The next, a scent, a song, or a shadow pulls you back into the ache. That unpredictability is the honesty of grief. It reminds us that the human heart does not follow the logic of the clock. I remember speaking to someone who lost her partner of 20 years. "Everyone tells me to move on," she said, "but I don't want to move on. Moving on sounds like leaving him behind, and I can't do that." I told her, "Perhaps you don't need to move on. Perhaps you can move with. Because grief doesn't demand that we let go of the person we loved. It asks us to find a new way to hold them, a way that honors the continuity of love, even in the absence of touch. To move with grief is to carry it like a companion, not a burden. It is to learn its language, the moments when it whispers and the moments when it roars. It is to understand that grief reshapes love. It stretches it across dimensions we cannot see. It teaches us to love in absence, to love through memory, to love without receiving. That is one of the most difficult transformations the human heart can make. But there is beauty in it too, because grief is a teacher. It teaches us about impermanence, yes, but also about depth. It shows us how love can endure beyond form, beyond body, beyond time. When I say grief is love with nowhere to go, I don't mean it is stuck forever. I mean that, for a time, it has lost its direction. The compass of your heart still points toward the one who is gone, even as the map of your life begins to change. Eventually, that love may find new pathways, not replacements, not substitutions, but expansions. You may pour it into art, into friendship, into the quiet act of remembrance. You may pour it into compassion for others who have known loss. You may pour it back into life itself. But first, You must allow it to be directionless. You must allow it to ache. Because grief, when denied, becomes bitterness. But grief, when felt, becomes tenderness. That tenderness is what keeps us human. So tonight, if you are grieving someone, something, some version of yourself that no longer exists, remember this. You are not broken. You are loving still. Your grief is proof of that. And perhaps the question is not how to stop grieving, but how to live alongside it. Can you give your grief a place at the table? Can you listen to what it wants to tell you instead of rushing it out of the room? Because grief has its own wisdom. It knows what we have forgotten, that love does not end, it only changes direction. When I think of grief, I often imagine a river. In the beginning it floods, wild, overwhelming, uncontrollable. You feel as if you might drown in it. Every breath, every moment is filled with its weight. But over time the river changes. It doesn't disappear, but it finds its shape. It carves itself into the landscape of your life, and eventually, you learn to live beside it. Sometimes you even find it beautiful, the way it glistens under the light of memory, the way it reflects what once was. That's what happens when we stop fighting grief. It becomes integrated. But integration does not mean forgetting. It means weaving the loss into your story in such a way that it no longer defines you, but it becomes a part of your wholeness. You see, grief is not a single emotion. It's a constellation. It contains love, anger, confusion, guilt, relief, longing. It shifts constantly, and each facet shows you something about yourself and the one you lost. In that sense, grief is an ongoing relationship. It is a dialogue between the living and the dead, between the past and the present, between who you were and who you are becoming. And sometimes that relationship is complicated. We grieve not only the person we lost, but also the things we never said, the apologies unspoken, the moments we missed, the versions of ourselves that will never meet again. Grief carries the weight of what if. But if we look closely, grief also invites forgiveness, not just for others, but for ourselves. Because in loving someone, we always fall short. That is the human condition. We can never love perfectly. We can only love as best we can with the tools we have at the time. Grief gives us the opportunity to forgive our past selves, to say, I did not know then what I know now. And that forgiveness softens the sharp edges of loss. Grief, in that way, is a bridge between love and wisdom. It teaches us not only how to lose, but how to live with the awareness of loss. Because to love is to sign up for loss. Always. Every time we open our hearts, we accept the possibility of heartbreak. But we do it anyway, because love is worth the risk of grief. And maybe that is the most profound truth. The presence of grief means that love was real. When grief arrives, it rearranges the furniture of your inner world. Suddenly, the room of your heart feels unfamiliar. The colors are the same, but the light has changed. The chair where they once sat still holds their shape. The silence hums with their absence. You begin to realize that grief is not something that happens to you. It's something that lives in you. It moves in, quietly, and asks, who are you now, without what you have lost? This question is the beginning of transformation. Loss, in its raw form, feels like a fracture. But over time, if we let it, grief can become a kind of alchemy. It transforms our pain into meaning, our sorrow into depth. It refines us, not by erasing what hurts, but by softening what resists. You see, grief doesn't destroy love. It purifies it. It removes the distractions, the petty arguments, the daily noise, and what remains is essence. Sometimes I meet people who say, I don't want to grieve anymore. I just want to feel normal again. And I understand. Who wouldn't want relief from that ache? But here's the truth. Grief isn't the enemy of normalcy. It's the path to a new one. When you grieve, you are learning how to love differently. You are learning how to hold what cannot be held. And maybe that's what love truly is. Not possession, but presence. We often think of love as something we give to someone else. But grief reminds us that love also exists within us. When the person is gone, the love remains, and we must decide what to do with it. Do we bury it with the one we lost, or do we let it become something else? Something that reaches beyond them, something that nourishes the living. This is how grief can evolve into legacy. A mother who loses her child might pour her love into helping other families heal. A man who loses his partner might write letters to the one who's gone, turning sorrow into poetry. A woman who loses her father might plant a tree in his honor so that something living carries his name forward. Love redirected. Love transmuted. Love finding new soil. But there is another side to grief, the part we rarely speak about. The anger, the resentment, the moments when we ask, why me? Why them? Grief often makes us confront the randomness of life, the unfairness, the brutal fact that love does not protect us from loss, no matter how strong, how pure, how faithful we are. And yet, to grieve is also to be reminded of how alive we are, because only the living can feel the absence of life. Only those who have loved deeply can grieve deeply. Grief is proof that your heart still works. It still aches, it still remembers, it still reaches. In this way, grief is sacred. It is not something to fix. It is something to tend to. Tending to grief is like tending to a garden after a storm. You clear the debris, you water what still grows, and you accept that some things will never return in the same way. But perhaps one day, something unexpected will bloom. Psych, flower you didn't plant, born from the soil of what was lost. That is the quiet miracle of grief. It doesn't just mark endings, it makes space for new beginnings. But not immediately. Not through forced positivity or spiritual bypassing. No. Healing begins when we stop trying to rush the ache away, when we allow ourselves to sit in the empty space, to feel the longing fully, to weep without shame. Because every tear, every sigh, every sleepless night is a testament to love that refuses to vanish. And maybe, just maybe, that love is not meant to vanish. Maybe it is meant to evolve into something we don't yet understand. I often say that grief has two movements: holding on and letting go. Holding on keeps the memory alive. Letting go allows life to continue. The art of grief is learning how to do both at once. To hold on, not to the pain, but to the meaning. To let go, not of the love, but of the illusion that love could have prevented the loss. Because love never promises safety. It only promises presence. And presence is what makes life beautiful, even in its fragility. So, if grief is love with nowhere to go, maybe our task is to give it somewhere to land again. Not to the same person, not in the same way, but somewhere new, somewhere where it can breathe. In the laughter of a child, in the warmth of a friend's embrace, in the art you create, in the compassion you extend to a stranger who is also quietly grieving. Because love never dies. It only seeks new forms. There is a moment, somewhere deep in the journey of grief, when something shifts. It's not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It comes quietly, like dawn breaking after a long night. You wake up one morning, and the ache is still there, but it feels different. Softer, more spacious. You realize that grief no longer owns you. It walks beside you. That moment is not an ending. It is an integration. You begin to understand that the one you lost is not gone from your story. They have simply changed chapters. They live now in your gestures, your choices, your memories, in the way you love, in the way you see the world. They have become part of your inner landscape. And that, perhaps, is the most profound form of love. To live in someone's soul even after you are gone. So, grief is not a prison. It is a passage. It takes you through darkness, yes, but toward understanding, toward tenderness. Because grief cracks you open. It breaks the illusion of control. It reminds you that everything you love is temporary, and that makes it all the more precious. When you've grieved deeply, you begin to love differently, more gently, more consciously. You stop taking people for granted. You look them in the eye longer. You say the words you once thought you had time to say. Grief, in this way, teaches presence. It teaches gratitude. It teaches humility. It reminds us that life is not measured by how long something lasts, but by how deeply it is lived. And that's the paradox. The very thing that breaks your heart also expands it. You emerge from grief not as you were, but as someone new, someone more attuned to the fragility and beauty of existence. You begin to see that love was never meant to be contained. It is meant to move, to transform, to connect. And so, grief, the love with nowhere to go, eventually finds its way back into the world, through you, through your words, your touch, your care. That's how love continues. Not as it once was, but as it can be now. Because in the end, grief doesn't ask you to stop loving. It asks you to keep loving, even when it hurts. To love with open eyes. To love with the knowledge that everything is transient. To love knowing that loss is not the opposite of love, but part of its story. And maybe that is what it means to be human. To keep loving, even when there's nowhere for that love to go. Part 5. Conclusion. 1,000 words. When I look at the faces of those who grieve, I see the entire spectrum of humanity. The sorrow, yes, but also the tenderness, the resilience, the quiet strength of those who continue to love despite absence. Grief humbles us. It strips away pretense. It brings us to our knees, and from that place we learn what it means to truly live. Because love and loss are not separate. They are the two hands that hold our existence. To live without love is to never risk grief. To live without grief is to never have loved. So perhaps the question is not how to end grief, but how to honor it. How to let it remind us of what matters most. Because every moment we love, every moment we lose, teaches us to be present, to cherish what is here, now, before it becomes memory. So, if your love has nowhere to go, let it stay. Let it breathe. Let it speak through you. Let it soften the way you move through the world. Because that love, unspent, unresolved, untethered, is still sacred. It is the proof that you have lived, that you have connected, that you have cared deeply enough to grieve. And in that, there is beauty. So perhaps grief is not love with nowhere to go. Perhaps it is love, still on its way home.